And I was like, oh my God, this is nuts. Does this even work? Because it has to do with this outside of time, people in the future living in the past and multiple and I'm like, whoa. And I looked at it and I was like, it actually does work. It's really crazy. But I never could have thought of that with my conscious mind. I never could have come up with that if I was plotting it out. So it was like an adventure every day. And I'd go back and read something I wrote and I'd be like, I wrote that? Seriously?
Hey, readers and writers. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 26 of Read and Write. Today, I'm chatting with entrepreneur Stephanie Benedetto about her visceral, non-linear writing style. Hi, Stephanie. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Deb. Wonderful to be here.
It always feels some kind of like almost disingenuous because obviously we are chatting before we start the recording. So it always feels just kind of weird just like to start the hellos all over again.
You know what, though? It's cool because in this moment, I could be having a completely different experience than I was when we first started chatting. So
this is true. Yes. So today we are talking about stories taking place out of time or stories with a non-linear structure. And we chose that because when you and I first chatted, oh God, I don't know how long it's been, a couple months at this point probably, you were telling me about the last time you did the NaNoWriMo. And we were talking about the story you were working on, which was a non-linear structure. How's that going? Have you picked it back up? Are you still working on it? I'm very excited because you had sent me some samples and I really enjoyed them. In fact, I reread them in preparation for our meeting tonight.
I wish I could say that I have picked it back up. I've thought about it a lot. The prospect of it is still overwhelming the crap out of me. Yeah. But I have made some progress. So I had an idea that I haven't yet implemented. So the reason it's been so overwhelming, the thought of it, is because I'm like, what do I do with this thing? So as we discussed, I wrote it. First of all, I had no plan. I didn't know what was happening. There was no plot outline. In fact, I started the process with just like I wrote maybe 500 words about a couple characters and sketched out some of the characters that I knew I wanted to write. I had an idea of the themes I wanted to explore. I knew I wanted to explore the nature of time and identity. And I had this idea about a central character who's a woman who lives outside of time. So, and I didn't, what would that be like? Is she boring? She doesn't have a story. So she has no idea of a past or a future. I don't even know how do I even write that? Like, who is she, right? So I
can see how that would be overwhelming because from her perspective, what does she do?
What is it like to be in her head? I had no idea. So there was no research involved in this. There were some inspirations. I can tell you what they were. The biggest one is the Netflix series Dark. Which has a really cool way of dealing with time. You know how you have the paradox, and it usually like when you have stories around time, at some point it devolves because you're like, wait a minute, how is this happening? If somebody from the future is doing something in the past,
I am definitely that person,
right? Yeah, it's very confusing. Well, the series Dark solved this problem by creating repeating time loops. So it's actually something that you can comprehend, but it's so complicated. And there was also this philosophic inquiry, like you can't escape your destiny. Like fate was an exploration. Anyway, so all this was kind of playing in the background. And that's what I started with. And I think maybe on the third day of NaNoWriMo, I created a random list of scenes. So I created like 40 or 50 scenes, not knowing what the scenes were. So I'd say Nadja in a diner meets a strange man. That's the scene. I don't know who the strange man is. I don't know what the diner is, whatever. And I just wrote down all these scenes and I just started writing. So every day I would use random.org and pick a scene if I didn't have one that was jumping out at me and just start with that scene and write. Because I realized very quickly when I started writing this thing, I was absolutely miserable because I was judging every single word on the page. I was like, oh, this is horrible. Oh my God, I hate this. Nobody's
That's
ever gonna,
awful. Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
I hate it when I do that to myself.
Yeah. I will never get through this entire 30 days if I do it like this. So I said, okay, I give myself permission to write absolute crap. My only job is to write my words. So I think I needed to do like 1,700 words a day or something. That's it. And I knew if I tried to plan it out and I tried to figure out what was going to happen, that was going to trip me up. So I just was completely random, completely just showing up with it and seeing what came out of me. And it was amazing. So what I ended up with, it's completely out of sequence. There are 7 different subplots. I don't know which belong and which don't. Is it even a book? I don't know. Maybe it's a series of stories. I don't know. You had said that when we chatted originally. Like, oh, I'm a big fan of like stories that follow. What did you say? Something like that, like a series or something.
Yeah, like a short story. I don't know what I exactly said, but yeah, I am a big fan of short stories who follow like a character or some characters. Like they just they're a collection. Like they just they fit in the same universe.
It kind of planted a seed because I thought, that's a real way out of this, that they don't have to fit together like a book. So anyway, it might not even be a book. I don't know. But it was a freaking mess. I had 50,000 words, but what do I do with it? And so I've done some sense and I played with it. But the progress I've made was I came across this concept called Zettelkasten. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
So Zettelkasten, I'm not going to do it justice, but it's a German concept. There was a guy, I think that was his name, or it comes from his name. And it's a way to store information with connections. So you essentially have like a living database. One of the problems that people have when they do research for a book or something is that, you file it away somewhere, but the filing systems that people usually use, it doesn't capture the connection. So maybe you're gathering some information about fabrics and clothes, and the reason you're doing it is because you want something in this era and this industry, and you put them into a file, but if you don't capture why you saw them as interrelated, you lose it. And then you go back through your notes and go, what does this even mean?
That has happened to me more than once.
Yeah. So Zettelkasten is a way to capture the links, and you can do it digitally online. You can do it with files. And it's kind of complicated, but I thought one of the things about it is that you can see, it kind of lets you look at how things are connected so that the connections jump out at you instead of trying to figure it out in a linear way. And I thought, that's perfect for what I've created here, because there's absolutely no way I can see it all at once. There's too much there. I don't even remember what I've written. And and I've read it a couple times. So that's kind of where I've come to, like, okay, Steph, that's what you're going to do. I have like things listed out. I have my scenes written. I have like little synopses, and I did a plot mapping after the fact so that I could kind of look at it and go, all right, but it was still
does this fit into anything?
Yeah, because I've never written anything like this before.
That's really exciting, and I can see where it's overwhelming, because I could see myself being overwhelmed by all of that, because I don't know. I admire you for writing the way you did, because I cannot write without a very detailed plot. Like, my plots are basically like the 0.75 draft. Like, I break them out by chapter and then by scene, and then I write like 4 paragraphs for the scene. So I basically have it's a very shortened rough draft of the story. I've tried that other approach where you just kind of just write, and it's just not for my brain.
Yeah.
So, wow, that you did that.
You have, in the NaNoWriMo community, you have what they call plansters, and those are the people who are the planners like yourself, who just plan everything out and they plot it all out in advance.
Right.
And then you have the pantsters. So those are the ones who fly by the seat of their pants, and that would be me.
Right.
But I'll tell you, it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life, writing like that.
Really?
Because, yes, the things that came out of me, I'm like, where the hell, who is writing this? Who is right? I didn't know what was going to happen at all. I had a sense of the direction we were going.
Right.
And I just made it my job to write. And it was pretty miraculous because it really and truly felt like something was writing through me.
You know, and I understand that because sometimes I get that sometimes when I'm writing, like, and I just explained I'm a very detailed plotter, but sometimes, you know, you're writing and then just kind of like, nope, this isn't right. It just needs to go this way. Like, and you don't find that until you start writing. Mm-hmm. And then you're left with this weird plot elbow almost, and you don't know what to do with it. And then somehow, someplace later, it does that again. And it fixes that. It makes it all flow together. And you're like, whoa, did my brain just do that? You're amazed at your own brain.
It is. So I was writing this. Not only did I write it out of sequence, because I don't know what order the scenes actually go in.
Right.
I tried to sort of, I still don't know. Uh-huh. But it's written about multiple realities and multiple timelines. So, and you're going from the past to the future. And I had to make myself a little chart of something so I could see it because I couldn't even keep it in my head. So I couldn't hold it. I couldn't control it. I couldn't know where it was going. And I got toward the end of the month and I'm like, where is this going? There was a mystery around it. There's a connection between this character, this woman who lives out of time, whose name is Nadja, and this guy named Glenn. And I'm like, it has something to do with his mother, but I don't know what it is. What's the connection between the two of them? I could feel it, but I didn't know what it was until I wrote it. And I was like, oh my God, this is nuts. Does this even work? Because it has to do with this outside of time, people in the future living in the past and multiple and I'm like, whoa. And I looked at it and I was like, it actually does work. It's really crazy. But I never could have thought of that with my conscious mind. I never could have come up with that if I was plotting it out. So it was like an adventure every day. And I'd go back and read something I wrote and I'd be like, I wrote that? Seriously? Like, what is this? And I find myself writing in different voices. There's a character, I call them the beings from the in-between. And it's sort of like they exist in all dimensions of reality, but they're in between the physical reality. And they have a really strange voice. And at one point, I wrote them talking to me as the writer, answering questions that I had about the story. You are confused because of this. And it was just such a weird experience. And what I learned from it was first that that's possible. But it taught me to live my life that way.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Like, I don't need to know where I'm going in the future. I can follow it step by step in the moment. And in fact, that's actually the way we live. We just play this trick in our brain of trying to control things. And what that does is it limits them. You know, we miss so much. It's kind of like, even for you, when you create that plot and you create your plan, you get into it and you can just feel something else like there's something else.
Right.
You can't, we can corral that wild creativity, but I want to harness it. I want to live my life like an open channel for the universe. And so I spoke to a woman who's a book coach, and she said that what she sees with the authors she works with is that they live their stories. Like, whatever is happening when they're writing a book, they're living it. It's like it's alive, and whatever's happening in their life is happening in the story. And what's happening in the story shows them something about what's happening in their life. And that was what was happening. I was truly exploring, what would it be like to live as if I have no future and no past? And I just show up in the moment. And I was doing it through this character in a story. But I was actually experiencing it at the same time. And it was so trippy and so moving. And I'd find myself moved to tears in some of the scenes because there's a deep spiritual thread in it as well, like who we are. And this character turned out to be, she's very childlike, but she was also very, very wise and just never worried about what was happening. And she has this wisdom that these other characters who are older than her don't have. And I just learned so much from all of it. It was amazing.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I mean, I can understand the concept of living the book you're writing, because I definitely, not now, because the novel I'm currently writing, I'm in the last 5 chapters, so you kind of just have to plow through the last 5 chapters. But when I'm in the beginning stages of the novel, since I do have it plotted out, I know, like, if I'm sad, I'm going to write a sad part. I'm going to go, jump ahead and write the sad part, because I don't know, it's easier than if you're feeling angry and then you write the angry parts and stuff like that.
And have you ever seen that? I've seen this very clearly when I've done writing marathons, like a week where we just show up and write, that somehow things that happen, conversations I have during the day in between writing, or interactions I have when I'm out at the grocery store, find their way into what I'm writing. If I'm writing fiction, right? Like, like that word or that phrase or something just jumped out, right? Like,
or the way it felt or the way it smelled. I mean, I think that might be our job as writers. I mean, that's how we make the writing real, is because we interject so much of what we've experienced into it. But yes, I completely see that, like, standing out waiting for my kids to get out of school, and like the way the sun hits on the bricks or something, like, it's like little things like that get kind of like filed away in your mind, and then you can bring them up because you've lived them and it's so real, and you know how it tastes or smells, or I don't know. I keep coming back to smell. Smell is very important to me. But I feel like, yeah, it's just those little things, like the way the air smells, or the way the sun looks on the snow right now outside my window, stuff like that.
And those little things just anchor the reader immediately. Like, it's so real. One of my clients shared a piece that he'd written about a scene with his mother.
Okay.
And there are these little details where he says, my hand on her hip. And her hand on her heart. There was a lot of hands touching.
Okay.
They were like just little details, and they were sprinkled throughout this piece. And as I was reading it, I was like, it just made it so intimate. It was touch. It was like intimate touch. And a scene where his mother says to him, your father and I hold hands when we go to sleep. That's how we make love these days. And it was just a very beautiful, and he's like, I can't think of any better way. And his mother's sick in the hospital, and like, but it was that one little moment that says something that it takes me into the scene in a way that if you describe it in a word, it's like, oh no, I'm actually feeling that in that moment.
I know what you're saying. Like, and for me, it doesn't even have to be that little bit of like, I don't know. You said intimacy, and I'm just going to use that word again. But it could be like the way they set down a salt shaker. I mean, just something that's unimportant, but something that's so real and so natural. You're right. It anchors the text, and it makes it real. It breaks up all that weird dialogue and inner monologue and whatever emotions they're feeling, and it grounds it someplace real.
Yep. And I'm there in the scene immediately.
Yep. And sometimes, like, I don't know about you, but if I go back through and I'm reading a scene that I've written, and it just feels like it's falling flat, like it's just a picture, and it's not, it isn't alive yet. I find just adding reading it over and adding a few of those little things here and there as they come to me immediately makes it better. I haven't made any big changes. I've only made those little tiny ones, and suddenly it's like 1,000 times better.
Yeah. I did an exercise years ago, and it stayed with me because it was so powerful. And I've repeated it since. Where we were reading the book, The Things They Carried. I think it's Tim O'Brien, if I remember correctly. It's a book about a guy who comes back, a vet. And I think it was a Vietnam vet, if I remember correctly. It might not have been that. I don't remember. But
I'm not familiar with it. But.
Yeah, there's a passage in it he talks about the things they carried. And he names all of the things in their pack as they're in the military, like we carry this and this. And there's something so powerful and moving about these things, like the actual objects, the specific objects. And so we did an exercise where we wrote something about the things they carried. And I wrote about a family getting together and the things that each of them was carrying to the dinner. And there was a couple, and they had a baby. And I don't have children, but I asked a few people, what would you carry in your diaper bag? And so I put those items in the diaper bag, and I talked about the things that they carry, not only physically, but it was the physical things were an echo of all of the emotional things that they were carrying, the mental things they were carrying. And it was so powerful, and it was real for people. And I'd never had a diaper bag, but I got it right. And people who were like, oh, that's so true. This is exactly what you would have in your diaper bag, you know? And they just related immediately. It's like, so that when you set down a salt shaker, as you were saying, there's a certain thing that happens, and you could talk about how, you know, the salt crystals are on top of it, or, you know, it makes a certain sound when it hits the table. And all of a sudden you're going, yes.
Right. Yeah. Those are the good moments in books where you identify, and you're just thinking about, you're just saying like the things they carried. And I'm thinking, as a writer, you want to input like the weird little details. It's not like, I don't know. She carried a piece of paper, and it's not just a piece of paper. She carried a paper that was sweaty from, she was holding it so hard, and it had a rip in the corner. Yep. Like it's just, I don't know. Those little details, they don't mean much, but they really just ground it. And it makes it more than just abstract idea, and suddenly you can see it and you can feel it. And
I'm so curious about what's the sweaty piece of paper she's got in her pocket.
I don't know. You talked about a family going to a picnic, and my brain went back to last time our family went to a picnic, and it was summertime. We went to a lake. So I'm picturing my daughter just fisting this piece of paper and like not letting it go. And it's gotten all sweaty because she won't let it go. But that's where my brain went.
Wow. I like it. It was so evocative. Like seriously, immediately I was curious.
Yeah, why is the paper sweaty? Yeah, exactly.
like she's fiddling with it. Like something is going on in her head. Like, what is it?
Right. Or like when you're a teenager and you're in class and you're folding a corner over and over and over and again. It gets that weird little crease, and then it starts to rip, and the fibers come apart. And I don't know why my brain went that way. I don't know why I'm talking about the way paper rips.
But it's so real. Everybody knows ripped paper.
Right.
And when you talk about ripped paper, because it's in a story, it immediately becomes a metaphor. And now I'm thinking maybe her heart is broken, you know, or maybe there's something in her life that feels worn and frayed. It's like, it's a way for us as writers to tell the reader something without telling them it, to show them it through the objects that they're surrounded with, that they interact with. It's really powerful.
That is very powerful. And a note out to, I don't know, new writers, don't tell every detail about everything. Only tell the important ones that mean something. So if you are writing a teenage YA novel and she's fiddling with a corner of paper and it starts to tear, that has to mean something.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, it's going to be really distracting. If it's not echoing something that's happening in her, I'm going to be caught up in like, all right, well, what was the paper? Like, come on. Like,
I feel like we're kind of like being a little bit hypocritical. We're like, yes, tell all the feelings and show all the details, but oh no, only tell the small important ones. It's such a fine line to walk.
Yeah, yeah.
But you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's a real getting a feel for it. And the only way to get a feel for it is to write and write and write and write.
Read.
And read. Yes.
And read.
Yes.
Yeah, those two go hand in hand. You can't get, you can be a better writer writing more and more and more, but you cannot be a better writer without doing both.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to see what other people are doing too.
And it can help to get a really, really good writing coach or mentor to learn from, which I had. I mentioned him earlier, you know, over 20 years ago I met him, and he was so great because he was really good at drawing out the voice of the writer without crushing it by trying to make it sound like he would want it to sound.
That is really rare. I've done some writing classes, and it usually feels like the instructor is saying, no, write it my way.
Yep.
Like that's the only way that sounds good to them. Which, you know, it's human error. I mean, it's a natural thing. I mean, I'm not a good teacher. If I was teaching a writing class, I probably would fall into that trap because that's what sounds good to me. So it's a really rare person to find someone who can do that.
Yeah. You know, for me, I don't do actual writing mentoring, but so much of what I learned from my mentor comes into what I do with my clients who are typically coaches, but they're also writers, and they want to write content that connects, and they want to write stories that draw in and illustrate concepts so they can educate their clients or potential clients.
Right.
And so for me, and this is really just for me, I feel it. Like, I feel into what wants to happen. I notice when I read something, does my attention drift? Like, what's going on there? Like you said, you can feel it when there's a piece that's flat. What do I need in there to ground it, right? Like, it needs something. Or sometimes, a lot of times, writers have like 500 different concepts in a short piece. Like, I'm exaggerating with 500 concepts, but maybe they have 5.
Right.
They're trying to put all this in there. And I'm like,
or 7 subplots.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I'm a hypocrite again. Oh my God. It's like, what does this really want to be? And I'm on the outside, so I can feel it that way, and kind of just give some gentle guidance and suggest questions and explorations rather than telling them. I mean, certain things I can get in and like line edit, right? Like, oh, no, chop this down. You don't need that. This is repetitive.
Right. That was too much exposition. We don't need to read that.
Right. Exactly. Like, it starts here. That was one of the things I learned that has stuck with me forever, is that start as late as you can, end as early as you can. So it's like, it's usually that
it is much action packed in there in those two possible spaces.
And the clearing of the throat that happens when we start writing. You know, it's like, you know, you just got to get it out of you. And sometimes it's a paragraph, and sometimes it's a sentence, and sometimes it's pages. You just needed to write that so you could write what comes next. But here's where it starts. Here's where you jump in. And then at the end, you know, you don't need all that like explanation and tying it up, like chop it. And that's not a rule. It's not a rule, but in general, that's a good idea. And if I'm working with people on short pieces, it's kind of important. You know, you want to start with something that grabs attention away.
When you're aiming for like 2,000 words, every single one matters.
Yeah. And these pieces are even smaller. Like, if people are writing social media posts, maybe 500 words would be a lot.
120 characters.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's a whole different kind of writing, but the same kinds of things apply. And what a great exercise, too, to have a 5,000 word piece and edit it down to 2,000, or edit it down to 1,000. Like, only
how low can you go?
Only the absolute essentials can remain. The rest you've got to cut, and so it turns you into a ruthless editor. But what you come up with at the end is so clean and so crisp.
Right. I absolutely agree. I've got I started using that the online tool, the Hemingway editor, and it really it just highlights the crap out of my work, and I notice all the adverbs I'm using and all the extra sentences, and I'm like, oh, let's clean that up. And suddenly at the end, I hate to admit it, but it is so much better.
Yeah.
Just having it, just like you said, it's kind of it's clean. It gets you to the action. It gives you the main emotion. Basically, you've cut away all of the fat, and you're only saying exactly what you need. And it's just clearer. It's easier for the reader to understand what you're trying to say. Yeah. And you don't have 4 paragraphs of exposition.
Yeah. And it's just tight. It's tight. You know, you can feel it.
That's one of the reasons I think the second draft is my favorite draft of writing a book. It's just, you're cutting away all that. It's like you said, start as soon as you can. But usually there's I don't know, an extra 15 pages maybe I can cut. And it just feels nice getting rid of those at the beginning. And you're like, oh, this is where it actually starts. They didn't need to climb up the stairs to the grandmother's house. You need to be in there. Just be there suddenly. I'm speaking from experience. I actually did cut some text about grandmother's stairs and just being in the house. But but yeah, it's that second draft is really I don't know. I see it trimming a bonsai tree kind of in my head.
Yeah, I like that image of trimming a bonsai tree. Because what's left is really beautiful.
And it's alive. And you're getting rid of all the dead parts.
Yeah. That's good.
So we haven't talked a bit really about nonlinear story structure. Maybe we should do that now that we're 30 minutes into the episode.
I have a tendency to just go with whatever's happening. I mean, I told you that's how I live my life. Like, where does this conversation want to go? It might not be with our plan.
No, that's fun. I love episodes that do that. But since we have promised that that's what we're going to talk about, we probably should talk about it just a little bit. So let's talk about Dark. You said that was your inspiration for it. I have watched a little bit of it. And it kind of jumps all over the place. Yep. And it is one of those type of like shows, like down here in my examples, I have The Witcher season 1 does a similar thing. It jumps around and you don't know where you are.
Yep.
And that can be really confusing at first, but then at the end, it feels very powerful.
Yes.
After you've seen everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a way... And I think that's partly where, at least for me, in writing something that was so nonlinear, out of sequence, because I know this story, whatever the heck it is,
this collection
is very clearly not linear. Mm-hmm. The timeline is, there are like 3 or 4 different timelines, but there are also timelines in different realities where they don't have a calendar like we do. But I kind of lined them up just to be able to think about it.
Okay.
And then you have characters from a future traveling back into the past and then doing things that affect the future, right, in different realities.
Uh-huh.
There's no way for me. I'm not a person who can think my way through that. I had to trust. I had to just do it. And trust that the threads would be there. Because
it's interesting you say threads, because my mental image of your research is a giant cork board with lots of like pins and thread yarn in it and stuff. That's what my mental image is. Yeah.
It's exactly what it is. These things are connected, but we can't see them because they're not in sequence. And so there actually is, because we're telling a story, and a story in its most basic definition is a series of events that happen in a particular order. Right. There still is, in a story that's nonlinear, there still is a way in which it's going to be read by the reader. It's just not in linear time.
Right.
But it needs to make sense for the story, just like a linear time, a story written in linear time would. So this is really good for me to talk about this because I'm actually noticing things about my story that, like, okay, we're going to need to discover things about these characters, but we can jump around in time to discover them, but you don't want to give away too much in the beginning, right?
Right.
Because there's a tension to it. So, and what's really interesting is that things that I wrote later on, I knew more about the characters. In the beginning, I didn't know. So I could go back and I need to make it make sense. Like I need to connect those dots.
Right.
So I don't, like, as I'm talking about it, what questions do you have about it? Or like about my experience with it? Because I'm like, I'll just keep babbling.
It's interesting because with the research I was doing in prepping for this episode, because this was an episode I wanted to prep for. It's one I had wanted to do for a while. It was a topic I wanted to talk about. But there's so much details you need to get right with a nonlinear structure to make it work, because it is like, it's kind of like a thriller. Like, it's like the old Alfred Hitchcock quote about a thriller. Like, there's a bomb under the table, and the audience can see it, but the characters at the table can't see it. Yeah. That's kind of how I picture a nonlinear story, is that the reader knows future events that the present characters don't know. So there is that bit of a tension and suspense to it. Sorry, my brain was wandering there. But one of the things I came across in my research was people, when they're recommending how to write a nonlinear story structure, was they said, write it in order and then reorder it. And so it's interesting that you did not take that approach. You just, you wrote it out of order.
Well, that's a really good idea though, because what I could do is rewrite it or put it in
or
order.
like combine them, put them back in order, and
put them back in order, and then see the threads and take them apart again, so that it kind of there are guidelines, there are things that generally work, but I'm not a rule follower. I don't believe in rules.
You do not sound like a person who follows rules very much.
I'm actually really good at following rules, like if I'm a guest in someone's house or someone's
or like
business.
The traffic rules, like, yes.
Exactly. Actually, I'm very good at following rules sometimes. When it comes to myself and especially creativity, no way am I going to follow.
Right.
In fact, I'm going to flout the rules and do exactly the opposite and see what I can get
just
away
for the
with.
fun of it and see where you go.
Yeah. And you can and see. Now, I found
there is something good in that experience. Like, you grow as a writer. Like, just talking from writing, when you do like you do the opposite of convention, it really does open, like, I don't know, it kind of like breaks down some walls in your brain so you can start thinking in different ways.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. It's gone already.
I'm sorry. But yeah, it would be interesting to see you rearrange the story, maybe just for your own sake, and put it in order, and then maybe rearrange it in another way that maybe it makes more sense to you, and still in a nonlinear fashion, but see where it is linearly, and then take it back apart. Yeah. Maybe you'll get more insight in the characters.
Yeah. And it's cool to think about that, because I like this idea. So not only does my character live, like, she travels through time, but she's traveling through multiple dimensions, and they're very different worlds, very, very different worlds. So it's cool to start out with her, scenes from her. We wouldn't know that's her because she's actually different in these different worlds.
Okay.
Like, we wouldn't find this out.
So like maybe it's like her consciousness is traveling and not her physicality.
Well, her physicality changes as well. Yeah. Like, she's different. Her personality changes because.
Oh, really? Interesting.
In this one reality, I don't know how the hell this happened, Deb. I mean, this is so weird how it happened, right? On the Earth, in the Earth-like reality, she's living out of time. But in the other reality, which is, it's Earth-like, but it's not Earth. It's very clearly, it's kind of magical. They have their machines have an animated quality. Like, their machines are alive. Their technology is actually almost, there's a word for that. I don't remember it. It feels very like Renaissance, very ancient technology, but at the same time it's advanced, but it's very different than how our technology advanced on Earth. And when she's there, she has a sense of past and future. And then she loses it when she goes to Earth. And so I got to see her freak out.
As a reader, that is amazing, because it would give me such a like, oh no, like, just, that would get that immediate response from me as a reader.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You had it, like, you lost it. Right.
Yeah. And
it's so hard to write that, though. I don't know about you, but I don't I don't want to do bad things to my characters. I know I'm supposed to, but sometimes it's so hard to do that to them. Well, but as a reader, you need it.
It was a gift for her to lose it. And then she gets it back and she's transformed again. It's like she has to go back and go back with what she's learned. It's really weird. And I couldn't, If
you ever put this in any kind of collection, I do need to read this, because you sent me some samples and they were really interesting. I loved that detail that Ellen's breath smelled like onions.
Yes.
On the bus.
Well, you would respond to something about smell, right?
I do. I don't know what it is. I have this thing about smell. I can't write like about a place unless I know how it smells, unless I know how the concrete smells in Los Angeles off the plane or something. I don't know. It's very strong for me, the sense of smell. But yeah, that's the part I liked, was the fact that Ellen's breath smelled like onions on the bus.
That's so funny. Yeah. And it says something about her. Like, don't we immediately have an image of who is this person, Ellen? She's got onion breath. It's kind of like the person you want to, like, you don't want to be rude, but you kind of want to pull away from.
Taking care of the main character. I felt like I couldn't get a sense of the main character's age. Like,
yeah,
at first I thought she was a child, and then at the end I was like, well, maybe she's like an adult, and she just, I very much enjoyed it, and like I said, if you ever put in any kind of collection, I need a copy. Please send me a copy.
I will, and I will finish it. That's a commitment. It's on top of my list. I'm like, all right, what's it going to take for me to do this thing? And I will. Maybe I'll end up hiring a book coach myself, just because I know I will show up and be accountable for it. It works.
Yeah, I definitely, having something to make you accountable for your own writing is the best kick in the butt ever. I wonder, I was reading something again for the research for the episode, and someone had something that was very, I don't know, powerful, like gut punch to me. They said it to me through their writing. That sometimes in a non-linear structure, the antagonist is actually time itself. Do you feel like that applies?
Oh,
I know. Did you get the gut punch too?
Well, it's just it speaks to the human experience. I think there's something very relatable about thinking of time as an antagonist. I don't know. I'd have to sit with that one and see. Because I think the exploration I have is not time as an enemy. It's more like time is just made up.
Okay.
So, and that's in the world that I've written.
Right. In this blog's defense, they were talking about Faulkner's Sound and Fury, where out of time means everybody was reliving their past over and over again. So it makes sense in that case. But totally. I can see the correlation in other pieces that I've read or watched or whatever, because I have a couple like Pulp Fiction or something. And
Dark, that series,
and Arrival,
for sure.
Yeah.
It's like they're doomed to repeat. They can't escape their past. And they can't escape what they're doomed to do. They're fated to do in the future.
Right.
So they are a prisoner of time. They are a prisoner of destiny. Even though they can travel, they're trapped. So that's an element there. Yeah.
That, when you said that the first time, it reminded me of a fan fiction I read, I don't know, years and years ago at this point. It was Harry Potter. But they were exploring the idea of a time loop, and how things degrade, and how some things could not be changed in order for the loop to begin again, which the loop had to begin again. Some things always had to happen.
Yes. And
you said that, and it immediately brought to mind that very old fan fiction I read ages ago.
Yeah, it was one of the central explorations in the series Dark was, you can't escape what you are. You can try. And so you discover things about these characters that you come to love that are truly dark, that they're going to do. And they can't think their way out of it. They can't beg their way out of it. They cannot change it. And yet there's something that they are able to change. So there's like a tiny sliver of hope in there.
Right.
As much as they keep repeating the same things that keep this loop going, that basically destroy the whole world. Of course, which is something I was exploring too. Like, these characters meet, and because they meet, the world ends. Earth ends, basically. But it doesn't. So they're actually like two different endings. Yeah. I wrote two different endings for it too. Like, here's what would happen if they did meet. Here's what happens if they don't. It was so
interesting.
Weird. And I don't know. Do they both belong in there? I think they kind of do.
It does sound like, well, it feels like you can't have one without the other because they're two sides of the same coin. Yep. But interesting, like you said, Nadja's your one main character and Glenn is the other person. Do you do point of view from Glenn's point of view? Or
yes.
Is it all?
It's mostly from his point of view. He actually became the central. She's central. Nadja is central. But it's far more interesting and relatable to see things through Glenn's point of view, because he has a typical sense of past and future, but he has these powers like telekinesis and telepathy, and he's this really cool psychic paramilitary guy. I'm like, how am I writing?
I was about ready to say that sounds like the time traveler's wife, and then you went into he's psychic and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, nope, doesn't sound like that anymore.
Yeah, and he's like, he kills people. They kill people who are to keep the timeline clean. And that's what his job is.
Suddenly sounding very Loki.
Yes, but it's got influences of all these different things and, kind of put together. And yet it's also deeply spiritual to me. I don't know how it happened. It's all these unknown influences, perhaps, and that have just moved through me and touched me in some way. They just come out.
I don't think we've mentioned, did we mention to the readers? I don't know if we did, that you're calling this work The Loom.
The time looms.
The time looms.
And which
I love that imagery of of a loom, of weaving threads together and breaking threads, snapping threads, braiding them, so they knotting them.
It's got multiple meanings, right? So it's like the time looms are actually a thing in this alternate reality. I should really give it a name. I don't think it has a name. Oh my gosh.
To be figured out.
And they're able to feel time and kind of like, they're almost like the fates weaving it. It's very like a harp and a loom. It's like a cross between them. But it also talks about the time looms. It's like, and that is a bit of that idea
like a looming
of
time.
Yes. Like it's looming, like it's coming, like it's hovering and it's dark. It's a stormy kind of thing. So I like that double meaning.
I like something that draws me to stories like the one you're describing is that characters are fated to do things, like they cannot change it. And I don't know, as a character, if characters were alive, as a character that would almost, at the end, you'd fight it, but at the end it's freeing. It's like, okay, this is going to happen. I can't change this. Like it unlocks a door, basically.
I hear that. For me, that echoes, we spend our lives trying to control or fight against feeling out of control, and to just stop that, to just let go and go, you know what happens is going to happen, and this is happening, is like,
right.
And that for me was exactly what I was learning in letting go of control of writing, like just letting it be horrible, letting it be chaotic, letting it not make sense, and just letting it be what it was, and then letting it show me what it wanted to be. And like I like to show up with life that way. It's like, it's going to be messy. I don't know where it's going, but if I try to control it, it's not particularly effective, because there are so many variables in my life that I absolutely cannot control. And it takes a lot of my time and energy, and I'm not enjoying. I could be using that energy to enjoy what's happening instead. So there's a piece of that. And I think, there's a beautiful kind of letting go in the fatedness. It's not just doom. Right. It's like, oh, I can stop trying to make things be what they're not.
Yeah, I think I was reading something a while back. Norwegian, Danish, something like Viking era thing, just spirituality, basically, at that point. Excuse me. In saying that they weren't afraid of their deaths because their death had already been chosen. Kind of like the Greek idea of the fates and the threads. That don't be afraid of death because your death has already been predetermined. So just do what you do, and then if it happens, it happens.
I like that. And it also feels really, not that it's predetermined, but that it's going to happen. Like just let go and enjoy exactly what you have right here. It's an invitation for that. That is something I struggle with in my own life, because like I have a job, I have writing, I have 2 kids, and it feels like you're always like working towards the next thing that happens. And sometimes it's just like, okay, just stop, breathe, enjoy the fact that your kid's sitting next to you on the couch, just stuff like that. Sometimes I have to get out of my own brain and think about that. So I can identify that with that, and I don't know, envy you for your more freeing lifestyle. It's just that it feels so much better now than it did the other way, and it's just really
that's good.
So
I love that your writing was cathartic. I mean, that's just great.
And it pretty much always is, because I do a lot of writing in my business, so I write about things that are happening in my everyday life. I also write what I call wild creation stories. So they're short stories a lot of times that have kind of a spiritual teaching or a theme, philosophical theme about them. And like, they teach me things when I write these stories. I don't always know what I'm going to write. Like, I have a topic, and yeah, it's messy when I write without knowing what I want to write. And it's something that is, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I don't know what I'm going to end up with when I look at the page, but it surprises me every time. And there's something there that shows me, wow, oh, that's my experience, or that's something I see, or that's something that I never knew until I wrote it. Like, I don't know how that's possible, but I can write things that I never knew until I write them. It's bizarre and beautiful and fun, really fun.
That reminds me, this whole conversation is reminding me a bit of like nightly journaling, just kind of going back through the day, not really thinking about it, just kind of cataloging it, and then kind of letting your brain wander a little bit. I used to do a nightly journaling and then a nightly poem. And sometimes that just makes you feel so much better once it's all out. And then you look back at these poems, and sometimes they really suck because I am not a poet. But sometimes you're like, wow, I get that. That makes sense to me. I mean, me reading my own stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, or there's like a line that you're like, wow, that's so cool that I said that.
Right.
That it came out that, like, where did that come from?
Exactly. So, Stephanie, where can listeners connect with you online?
They can connect with me the best at theawakenedbusiness.com. If they are interested in my stories, I would suggest my podcast, Wild Creation Stories. I share them on my website as blog posts, as well as on the podcast you can listen to as audio.
Awesome. So you're basically doing audio versions of these short stories. Is that what the whole podcast is?
Yep. Wild Creation Stories is that. I have a second podcast that is conversations with inspiring entrepreneurs about kind of like what it is to do spiritual business. So sometimes we talk about business topics. Sometimes it's more about just exploring the spiritual journey as an entrepreneur and changing the world and being human. So it's very interesting. It's, introspective and philosophical and spiritual and all that stuff,
Oh, nice. I will have to I'll have to check those out. I knew about your story one, but I did not know about the other one.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I had a great time tonight.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me.
So join me next time when I'm going to talk to Kenneth Scott about establishing themes in his upcoming novel. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, and go do what you do best. You got this. Read and Write Podcast is edited and produced by Deborah Zebarth. Theme music was written and performed by N Love and provided by Lofi Girl. Audio effects were created by Red Octopus and Black River Phonogram. Show notes and previous episodes can be found at readandwritepodcast.com. Special thanks to my guest, Stephanie Benedetto, and all the subscribers who make this podcast possible.